Hey folks, I've had this plan to turn some of the paper collectibles I have that are in a box in a closet someplace that nobody gets to see. It's just a waste. And I thought I'd start with this. This is Lumbering as an Industry. It was visualizing the lumber industry. It was put out in 1939. It's got lumber cards with descriptive text on the back. And I thought I'd put them out on our kitchen table and let you take a look at them. There's quite a few of them, so I think I'll probably do them in a couple of chunks. We'll do the first chunk first and see what you think, and then let me know if you want to do the second chunk. So I present to you Lumbering as an Industry. The illustration shows two men cutting a notch, or as it is rightly termed, an undercut, in a large tree, preparatory to felling it for timber. The depth of the undercut will vary depending on the size of the tree. The undercut is made from 1/4 to 1/3 of the diameter of the tree on the side on which it is intended the tree should fall. This would seem to be the beginning of the work, but cutting is started only after a party of forest rangers have made what is called a timber survey. These forest rangers, known as timber cruisers, go through the area selected as a timber sale plot and mark all trees which may be cut for lumber. This is done in a manner which will leave sufficient large healthy trees for care for the natural reseeding of the plot to be cut over. Making the undercut in the tree, the men must first determine which direction to make the tree fall to effect the least possible injury to small trees and to prevent the chosen tree from being broken or splintered. These men are very skillful and can cause the tree to fall in any direction desired, if it does not lean or if not too heavy on one side. The bunk car. A string of portable bunkhouses is an important edge for a modern-day logging enterprise. These bunkhouses, or old converted railway cars, are used in part because railway tracks are laid in advance of operation and it is more economical to use the old boxcars than to construct buildings. Furthermore, when lumbering is done on a given area, it is only necessary to haul the cars to a new location over the tracks on which the logs are to be hauled from the area to the mill. In the small lumbering operations today, and in all operations in the early days, buildings were erected near the center of a lumbering area. These were usually made of logs and consisted of bunkhouses, cook shack, and a dining shack. The locations of these buildings may still be found in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, but the buildings have usually been destroyed by fires which swept through the remaining slashings. Life in the modern lumber camp on a large operation is quite different from that of early days with regards to general cleanliness of person and living quarters. Facilities for a shower bath are usually present in a modern lumber camp. Camps are kept clean and vermin are usually not found in the living quarters. This contrasts sharply with the camps of early days. In addition to the buildings mentioned above, the modern camp usually has a company store and a room for recreation. Felling a tree. In lumbering, the act of bringing a tree to the ground is called felling. The group of men, usually 3 and sometimes 4, are called a felling crew. The illustration shows the 2 men in the foreground sawing a tree. These men start sawing on the opposite side of the tree from the undercut. As the sawing progresses, they will insert a wedge into the cut to keep the weight of the tree from closing the opening and binding the saw. The wedge also serves to tip the tree in the direction it is intended to fall. When the sawyers have cut into the tree so that only an inch or 2 of solid wood is left, The tree will start to creak and snap as the few remaining fibers of wood begin to break. The sawyers then step safely away from the tree, and the cry of "Timber!" rings through the forest. A swishing, which rapidly grows to a roar and ends in a mighty crash, marks the second step in the lumbering process, as the mammoth of the forest falls to the ground. Bucking a tree. The bucker is the title given the worker shown in this picture. His job is to cut or buck up the logs after the swampers have trimmed off all the smaller limbs and cleared the debris that is made by the felling. The larger limbs and the tops, which are too small to be converted into lumber, are sawed off by the buckers and piled neatly with the smaller limbs. These slashings are treated differently in various parts of the country. In some sections of the country, a large part of these slashings are used in manufacturing or as fuel. In sections where the cost of hauling them is prohibitive, they are left in the piles until after a heavy rain or snowfall and then burned. This is to reduce the potential fire hazard present if they should be left and allowed to dry. As the debris is being removed from the immediate vicinity of the trunk of the tree, the buckers saw the trunk into logs. These are usually from 16 to 32 foot lengths, which are then taken by various methods to a central loading place or landing, as it is termed. Skidding with a spar tree. In the foreground is a steam boiler that operates a winch or a type of drum which winds up the cable running through a pulley on the spar tree and thence to the log. As a steam winch operator winds the cable on the drum, the log is drawn to the landing, where it is kept until it has been scaled by the timber scaler. The timber scaler measures the length and the diameter and computes the number of board feet in each particular piece of timber. In the small picture, upper left corner, a lumberjack is shown topping a tree which is to be used as a spar tree. He has a pair of climbing spurs strapped to his legs, which he drives into the bark of the tree, and a safety belt to keep him from falling. The topping is usually done with an axe, and the man must be very skillful. He cuts off the top of the tree in much the same manner as the fallers. An undercut is made on the side where the top is intended to fall, and then instead of sawing to this undercut, another notch is made above and on the opposite side. As the wood is cut away, the top will begin to crack. The man then tightens his belt and gets close to the tree, for when the top falls, the rest of the tree will whip and sway for a few minutes. This spar tree is then rigged with cables to help it stand the strains it will be subjected to in snaking the logs from the vicinity. A setup such as this is only used when there is a very heavy stand of timber and it would not be practical to use movable equipment. Skidding. This illustration shows another method used in moving the logs to the landing or place in which they are gathered together for the next phase of their trip to the sawmill. The tractor is equipped with a revolving drum. This drum takes up the cables which have been fastened to the log by a helper, tractor driver's helper. The tractor operator then starts the drum revolving, drawing the timber into the arch of the skidding trailer. When the trailer is fully loaded, the logs are dragged or skidded to the landing. This method is used for the collecting of large scattered logs in fairly rough country that is not too densely forested and does not warrant the rigging of a spar tree, the laying of a railroad track, or the construction of a logging road. Loading logs on a sled. A third method often used in the North Woods in collecting timber and transporting it to the landing or directly to the mill is called sledding. This picture shows the type of sled and method employed in loading. The sled is drawn by the tractor to the location of the logs. The tractor is then used in assembling the logs for loading. A pair of pulley blocks are placed between two trees which are on the opposite side of the sled from the pile of logs. See illustration. The cable from the blocks is run over the sled and fastened to the log, which is to be pulled up the skids with the assistance of the men in the foreground. The men help to roll and direct the log by means of peavies. The peavie is a swinging hook fastened to a sturdy pointed handle. It is used by driving the hook in the lower side of the log with the point of the handle resting on the upper side as shown in the illustration. By raising the handle, the log is turned and so progresses up the incline. After the sled is sufficiently loaded, the logs are chained down and hauled to their destination. Log train. The railroad is often used in transporting the timber from the landing to the mill. The flat cars shown in this illustration are hauled empty from the mill to the site of the landing or loading place. The derrick shown, mounted on a flat car, is operated by steam. The cables leading from the jib, the arm to which the cables are attached, are swung over the log, the hooks are attached, and the log is raised. It is then guided over the car, being loaded by two men who direct it by pulling on the lines attached to the hooks. The log is then lowered to its place on the load. After the cars are loaded, they will be taken to the mill. The derrick is not always mounted as shown, but instead may operate from a large truck or tractor. The latter method is more often used, as its use will save the switching of the cars, since empty cars must be placed next to the derrick for loading. There is another method that is used quite extensively on large operations. A heavy cable will be stretched between two trees which have been braced. This is called a high line, which may be used in raising the logs and placing them on the cars. Hauling by truck and railroad. 4 methods are employed in transporting logs to the sawmill, depending upon the size of the operation, prevailing weather conditions, and topography of the country. The 2 methods shown here may be considered the more modern type of hauling. Although trains have been used for many years, they've only recently become a much used means of transportation. Better methods of operation in general, and the fact that the tracks may be used again when the smaller trees have become suitable for lumber, justifies the building of a railroad when the hauling distance is sufficiently great. Often the tracks will be taken up and moved to another location, but the roadbed will be kept open for later use by occasional attention. Frequently, the old railroad bed will be used as an auto road for the prevention of the spread of fires or for access to the backcountry in the event of a fire. Note the queer-looking smokestack on the engine. This is a spark arrestor to keep the engine from starting fires. Trucks have only come into general use during the last few years. The modern tractor, with a blade attached to the front, bulldozer, which to cut down brush and push dirt much as a plow, has made the construction of truck trails much less expensive. Often after the bulldozer has made a fair truck trail, rough timbers will be laid in the manner of railroad tracks. See the illustration. These roads are usable in wet as well as dry weather, an important item in lumbering because much timber must be hauled in all seasons to keep the mill well supplied. A cessation of delivery of timber to the mill often results in a loss to the lumber company as well as to the men who are laid off during this period. Transportation of timber to the mill may well be considered one of the most important operations of the lumber industry. Horsepower and river transportation. The method shown here is a good example of the type of logging that was carried on in the pioneering days of lumbering. This method is still used to some extent in logging operations where the timber is fairly small and the expense of tractors or the nature of the country is prohibitive to other forms of haulage. The logs are hauled to an open piece of ground which will have a nearby stream in the spring or to a frozen lake or river. They are then left in piles until spring, when the thawing of the ice will allow them to be transported by the flow of water to the mill pond. The men and horses or mules are very skillful in overcoming difficulties such as rough, rocky country. As the logs are dragged over the snow, it will be packed down and become icy. Soon a skid road will be formed. The logs are then hauled without much difficulty. This work, done in the winter, follows the felling of trees during the preceding spring and summer. This practice has the advantage of a savings in transportation costs in getting logs to the mill. There are disadvantages, however. Aside from being slower, there are losses incurred by timber breakage and the washing away of dams built to form mill ponds. When streams are not available or the mill is near the site of the logging operation, the logs may be hauled in the above manner directly to the mill. A sluice way. A sluice way, as shown in this illustration, is one of the methods used to transport timber to the mill pond. A stream is diverted above the landing at a higher elevation and made to run through a ditch or flume to the landing and thence to the mill pond. The logs are placed in the flume, which must have a downgrade all the way to the mill pond in order to carry them by the current of the water. This is a very satisfactory method of a log transportation if the topography of the country permits. There is only the initial expense of construction and a very small maintenance cost. Ordinarily, the flume can only be used in the spring unless a year-round stream is available. There is very little danger of loss of timber, and log jams are practically unknown due to the construction. The construction permits only one or at most two logs to travel in any part of the flume at the same time, and as the inside is fairly smooth, there is nothing to cause the log jam. As implied above, the mill must be below the cutting area to make this method possible. Breaking up a log jam. A method often used in conjunction with the flume or sluice way is shown in this illustration. The logs are sent down the flume to the river and floated to the mill. This method of transportation of timber follows also illustration number 10. After the ice is melted in the spring, the cut timber is released and floated with the current to the mill pond. The lumber industry has used this mode of timber transportation for many years, but it is not as popular now as it was in the early days. The illustration shows a driver, as the men are called to attend the logs, attempting to break up a small log jam. If the jam is not cleared in its early stages, it may become larger and block the river. As more timber floats down, it will create a dam. This is very dangerous, as it may suddenly release the water which has been held back, causing a rush of water down the river. The ensuing pressure often causes the mill pond dam, which is below, to break, with the possible loss of lives and the timber which has been stored there. The log jams must often be dynamited with the attendant dangers stated above. The uncertainty of delivery of timber to the mill and the dangers associated with this method have been a large contributing cause of the change to other methods of transportation, such as railways and logging roads.